Photos of slavery from the past that will horrify you. Number 1. The Slave's Shackle, 1907. This is a horrifying photo. It is a picture of a British sailor removing the shackles on a slave's ankle in 1907. In order to keep the slaves in line during the journey from Africa, they had to keep them in shackles. This was to keep the slaves from running away. A very sad photo. Number 2. A Woman and Her Slaves. When you first look at this photo, you wouldn't know that the men are slaves judging by the way they are dressed. The major clue is when you look down at their feet and you see they have no shoes on. In the 1860s, slaves were not allowed to wear shoes. Number 3. Slave children. Seeing photos of adult slaves is bad enough, but seeing child slaves is completely heartbreaking. Fortunately, by the time these children grew up, slavery was abolished. This gave them both a chance at a happy and productive life. Number 4. The African Slave Ship. Of all the photos of slavery from the past that will horrify you, this is possibly the worst. Back in slave days, ships went to Africa and they pulled these poor people from their homes to put them on ships and bring them overseas to be slaves. The number of Africans on the ship is heartbreaking. Number 5. U.S. prisoners forced to be slaves. This is a photo of United States prisoners who were captured and forced to be slaves during the war. The Japanese treated these poor people badly until they were either killed or freed. This photo shows you how horrible things were back then. Number 6. Sex slaves training for military duty. There are so many sad things about this picture, it's difficult to know where to begin. The girls in this photo are sex slaves, and they look like they are no older than 15 years old. These girls should be in high school, hanging out with their friends, studying and preparing for college. Instead, they are forced to be sex slaves. The Japanese needed as many soldiers as they could get, so they trained the sex slaves to fight in battle. There aren't too many photos more shocking than this one. Number 7. Freed slaves. Of all the pictures we've shown you so far, this one is the only one that shows some hope. In the top picture, you see a bunch of slaves wearing no shirts and no shoes. The photo on the bottom is of the same men after they were freed. They were fully clothed, wearing hats, and reading the newspaper. This must have been a great day for these men. Number 8. The Worst Men in the World. This is a photo of 3 Arabian slave dealers. It was their job to buy and sell human beings as slaves. These men are as bad as they come. There's no excuse for forcing a person into slavery and then making money for it. Number 9. Human zoos. In 1899, people took Selknam natives and used them in human zoos. This is one of the most inhumane things a person could ever do. The idea of putting people in cages so that the owners of the zoo can get paid by people to walk around looking at them is horrible. The poor people in these human zoos were not treated like humans at all. They had all of their human rights stripped away the second they were put into cages. Number 10. Tall women punished in China. In China, women were only supposed to grow so tall. Those who grew too tall were punished by spending their days standing with a door with holes over their heads and through their shoulders. It is very sad that back then people were punished for the way they looked. Today, women in China are not punished for being too tall. Many tall women actually get very high-paying jobs as models. Number 11. Slaves in Brazil. Brazil is a very popular place for coffee crops. Today, people are paid to work in the fields and harvest those crops. The working conditions are safe today, and they work reasonable hours. Sadly, years ago, the Brazilian coffee growers used slaves who they forced to work in the fields all day with no pay and horrible working conditions. This is a photo of the slaves working in the fields under the worst conditions possible. Number 12. Irish slaves. Africans were not the only people that were used as slaves a century or two ago. This is a picture of Irish slaves. They weren't treated as poorly as some slaves, as they were given shoes and clothes to wear, but they were still slaves. Number 13. The Slave Convention. Before slavery was abolished, there was a slave convention. It was a group of people who worked hard to get slavery abolished. This is a photo of a few of the members who eventually were successful. These women may have been slaves once, but eventually they became heroes. Number 14. Amazonian Slaves. This is a photo of 4 people from an Amazonian tribe who were used as slaves. This is a very sad photo. They were stripped of their clothes and chains were put around their necks. This photo shows just how horrible these people were treated simply because of where they lived.